I learned about Y Combinator, and I started working for YC companies remotely as an engineer. So I did one company in the batch of 2015 called Kickback, which was a gaming wagers company. So you could basically play video games and kind of bet money on the outcome of the game and play against other people. And then I joined another company that was focused on fintech services for immigrants in the US, basically helping you get credit scores, helping you get financial services and things like that. And about 5-6 years of doing kind of like these jobs from like C to Series B, Series C, I never really liked managing engineers. So you're gonna get to a point where you start a company, everybody's excited to like build, and you're kind of hagging on the product and all these things. And then as you get to product market fit, the roles kind of change. Now you have a bunch of engineers who are mostly like directing priorities, resources, and that just was not what interested me. And then I saw one tweet on Twitter randomly about a firm called 645 Ventures that was starting in New York. And the idea that they had was taking some of the data-driven sourcing ideas that the growth stage firms were doing. So in venture capital, there were firms like Insight Venture Partners, which is now a very large multi-stage firm. They were saying, hey, all these people that are selling software, there's all these online websites with like reviews, with catalogs of products and things like that. Why don't we use that to find companies instead of the Sequoia model of the time, which was like, if you don't live in the Bay Area, we're not going to invest. Don Valentine, who was the founder of Sequoia, he said that if I cannot bike to your office from the Sequoia office, we're not going to invest. So everything was very network driven. And what the growth stage then did was, well, once a company has like 2, 3, 4 million of revenue, it doesn't really matter where you are. All that matters is whether or not you can put money to work in an efficient way. So they kind of changed the growth stage model. And what we did at 645 was, now that the cost of building software has gone so low, a lot of companies actually have some product before they even raise a seed round because it's very inexpensive to get started. So I built a platform called Voyager, which look at internet data to find interesting companies early on. So looking at Twitter comments, looking at GitHub open source project, product hunt, all these different websites. And this is remotely from Rome, and the firm is based in New York. Our first fund was 7 million. So the way venture works, for those that are not familiar, you basically get paid 2% of the capital that you manage. So if you have a $7 million fund, you're getting roughly $140,000 a year to pay for all the expenses. So salaries, legal, office, events, and all of that. So obviously I did not move to New York because we did not have any money at all. Our second fund was 40 million, and that's when I moved from Rome to New York. And then our third fund was 160 million. Our fourth fund was 400 million. And the firm kind of went from doing small seed stage investments to doing lead investment at the Series A, and then participating in Series B rounds. So this was roughly from 2017 to 2022, so about 5 years. And the venture market has really evolved in the US, and this is something that in Italy and in Europe generally doesn't really happen as much. Here we have kind of like the massive funds, so Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia, Accel, Index, Bessemer, all the usual suspects. These funds will do anything at any stage, basically. And when you go to the Andreessen Horowitz office at the Rosewood, you basically walk in and you're like, hey, I'm an early stage cybersecurity founder. Where should I go? And they're like, well, the growth stage is here, and then the growth stage consumer is there. You have to go to another building. It's like, I don't really know the people that work on that team. It's a very disjointed organization, which works because they have so much AUM. I think last I checked, they're like 24 billion under management. So every year they're getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars to run this firm. And so the idea at Decibel, which is the firm where I'm at right now, is the founders, the earlier you go, the more specialized help that you need. So a company that has a lot of revenue and has a lot of customers and employees, the founders kind of know what they're doing, right? They don't really need help figuring out product market fit. They don't need help figuring out who their customers are going to be. They usually have a hiring process that is already set up. Versus at the early stages, if you're building a company in healthcare, what you need is very different than a company building a cybersecurity product, which is very different than a company building a consumer product. So Decibel only does early stage investments in technical founders. That is cybersecurity, developer tools, data and engineering. Obviously, nowadays, there's only two left. There's cybersecurity, and everything else is AI. There are no developer tools that don't focus on AI. There's no data product that doesn't focus on AI. So the market is specializing even more. Our first fund was 225 million. Our second fund is 285, which we just finished investing. And then our third fund now is 295. So that's about 850, 900 million of capital under management. We only invest in companies that are pre-product market fit. So, usually people don't really know what's early and what's late. The best way to do it is it cheap or is it expensive? If the valuation of the company is above 100 million, that's too late. We don't really play in those rounds. If it's below 100 million, it means that you're still trying to figure out what the company is about. And we have a couple things on our team. So we have full-time business development person. Again, at the early stage, the most important thing is talking to customers, understanding, is what I'm building really needed? What am I not thinking about? How can I get people to give me more feedback? So we have a full-time person that runs a community of about 2,000 early adopters. These are kind of like VPs, CTOs, kind of executives in large company, usually Fortune 2000 plus. Then we have a full-time talent partner. So if you're an engineer, you might have hired engineers in the past, but you do not know how to hire a salesperson. You do not know how to hire a marketing person. You kind of don't understand a lot of these nuances. So what Lauren does on our team is kind of help you build out all of that. And then we have an equal partnership. So we have 4 general partners. All of us, we have kind of like lead investments, but we work with every company. So you kind of get access to all of us. And I was a founder. My partner, John, was a founder. My partner, Jess, used to be a Palantir. Dan used to be at VMware. So we all have experience in kind of technical domains. So that's kind of the speed round through the VC side. And then on the podcast side, and this maybe goes back to like why you should be in the Bay Area. In October of 2022, I was with Sam Altman at the OpenAI office. And this was before the ChatGPT launch. And they basically had this kind of like hack day where they were previewing some of the APIs and products that were going to come out. And my friend Sean and I were there, and we were like, nobody's really talking about this yet, but like this is clearly going to make a big impact. So we started the podcast, and then OpenAI was like our first guest. And now in the last year, we had about 40 million people between social media and podcasts or YouTube that kind of consumed our content. So we kind of coined this term of like AI engineer. So if you think about software engineering, if you go way back, you have firmware engineers, you have database engineers, you have all these like specialized roles because the languages are very low level. And then the more we kind of progress, the more now you have front end and you have back end engineer mostly. There's not as many specialized titles anymore. And now even those are converging into AI engineers. As you give people more access to AI tooling and things like Cursor and ChatGPT to write code, you're able to kind of do a lot more on your own versus having to hand off things back and forth. So on average, the seed companies that we work with, maybe they would have needed, 5, 6, 7 engineers before to get to a Series A. Today, they might have 3 or 4, and the teams are smaller. So I think there's a lot of discourse about AI as far as cost savings. So especially in very large companies, you can replace a lot of people like in customer support and sales and some of these roles. But even at the early stages, you're just not hiring them at all. So it really helps you accelerate, because the number one thing that slows companies down is like communication overhead. So when you start a company, it's 2 people, you kind of know everything about everything. Then you have 3, 4, 5, 6. Once you get to 20, it kind of starts to break. So if you can keep the team as small as possible, the longest that you can, you get productivity acceleration. So yeah, I would say those are the 2 main things that I do. And I still do a lot of coding. So we have a lot of internal tools that I've been building that helps us source companies. I do a lot of open source development just to, stay in touch with the community. Well, I found my first job in VC through Twitter, so there's that. I would say on Twitter, most people, if you have something interesting to say, will engage with you. So, we have our podcast account, like Elon Musk follows us on Twitter, like Mark Andreessen follows me on Twitter, like Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, is one of our followers. So here, there's a big culture of like being recognized for the work that you do. Like it's less about what, I kind of call it like playing baseball cards. It's like, this is who I am and where I worked and like where I went to school and all of these things. And I think maybe in a lot of like industries and subcultures, like especially in Europe, I think there's a lot more interest on what have you done before, not like, and where you've done it. versus like what is the work that you've actually done. And I think I remember, even in Italy, like a few years ago, we had this like a digital transformation initiative, whatever, and they were like hiring in the government for people that understood startups and technology. And it was like, oh, you need to have like a master's degree. And it's like, why would that help with anything? So I think here, on the other hand, it's almost like nobody cares what you've done. People care about what are like your unique ideas, what are like kind of like proof of work things, like what are you doing that shows that you're really passionate? Because everybody goes to person XYZ who's like popular and asks, can you mentor me? Can you grab coffee with me? Blah, blah, blah. But then there's really nothing that makes you stand out. So for us, it's always been, I've had people reach out, like Microsoft reach out and they were like, hey, do you want to do a briefing for Satya about, kind of like the AI startup scene and like some of the new trends that you're seeing, because we're in Seattle, we want to be more connected to the Bay Area. And all of that happened because we were tweeting about some of the events we were doing here, like we did not reach out to them. It's just like, if you put the work out there, it's easier for people to come back and see it. So yeah, Twitter is it's very good for like breaking out of maybe the network and kind of being rewarded versus, I would say LinkedIn, you get rewarded for like different things, So you get rewarded for like the slop, so to speak. It's like you're writing all these content that like maybe people don't really care about, but like the algorithm ranks highly. So we have one core investment thesis at the firm that we call services as software that Sequoia has now copied. So they say the same thing, but basically things that used to be outsourced, you can use AI to replace with AI agents. So I run a podcast and usually you have an outsourced editor. So you send your recording. We still have that for the audio editing, but I built an open source kind of like podcast helper. So, I can give it the audio of an episode and then it generates the show notes, it generates the chapters and the timestamps. It does kind of like a write-up of all the most important things. It has all the transcript with the name of the speakers. And that's one thing that a lot of people actually use. You'll be surprised how many people do podcasts, which is a lot of them. But again, it's like, how do you take things that maybe you had to ask somebody before to do, and now you can automate for yourself? I think that's why the AI engineer movement is so important. Like it's even less about, building a product. And now with LLMs, you can build things that are like so small because the model does so much for you, So like thinking about doing the extraction of the show notes, the chapters and whatnot, all of that is just one prompt. And then you just need to give it the transcript of the episode and then it comes up with all of it. And we do one episode a week. And I would say that saves me at least like, 3-4 hours every week. So that has been like, 200-300 hours that I've saved just by building that. And then there are more technical things, like we're launching a text-to-web evaluation thing. I don't know if you know LMSys Arena. It's kind of like this open source evaluation for model performance. And right now it's text to text. So you can give it a prompt and it generates text and you decide which one you like better. I just built with them one thing to do text to website. So if you give it a prompt, generate this UI, basically generates and then it runs in your browser, and then you can decide which one that you like more. And that's also going to be open source once it's released. But yeah, I think like it's really easy for the models to understand code. So the more open source stuff you build, the more you can shove it into the next project and have a learn from that.
Were you part of the E2B investment like position?
Yeah. I led the investment. Yeah.
Can you tell us about the story of like how like the team?
How you make so E2B is a good example. So this is a company that started in the Czech Republic, in Prague. And I met the founders 3 years ago on Zoom during COVID. And they were doing something that was actually not interesting at all. They were doing basically like web search for developers. And then they pivoted to E2B in 2023. And Vasek, who's the founder, he reached out and it was like, hey, we're going to visit San Francisco. I saw you're doing an event. Can we like demo at the event? So what E2B does, basically, when you use ChatGPT or Claude, sometimes it can run code and do data analysis for you, and then it shows you like charts and things like that. What E2B does is basically provide the infrastructure to run the code safely. So the LLM generates the code, sends it to E2B, E2B runs it, gives you the results back in a safe way. And so they pivoted to that at the time. So they came to our Latent Space. I think that was the Final Frontiers event, we called it. They demoed there, and then they moved into the office where our podcast studio is. So I mean, going back to like being in the Bay Area, kind of like serendipity. You know, these guys were like in the Czech Republic. It's like nobody cares about them, right? You're kind of like in Prague, and it's like it's not an AI hub. They move here, and they move into like this space called Solaris, which is like an AI co-working space. And we have our podcast studio there, and so we kind of started running into each other, and they were like, "Oh, we're gonna demo at this event." And then I introduced them to a couple of the founders that we took to the podcast studio, and we invested in April of this year. So I met Basic, and the way this business works is basically every time you need to run code, they spin out what they call a sandbox, which is like a safe environment. In April, they were doing 20,000 sandboxes a month, which was a lot compared to 0, but it was like not that much. But we had this big team of like what we call the LLMOS. Like, what do models, if all the models are getting commoditized, right? Every model is kind of the same. How do you give the model tools to increment its capabilities? So one example is web search. So if the model needs to find, up-to-date information, how does it do it? There, obviously, ChatGPT just released ChatGPT Search, but there's also a company called Exa that does it, Tavily that does it. Code Interpreter is the other one, which is what E2B does. If your model needs to run code, if you use ChatGPT, it has Code Interpreter. But if you're using the API, it doesn't have it. Or if you're using a Llama model, it doesn't have it. If you're using Grok, it doesn't have it. So we invested at the time. And I mean, we make decisions like this. So we meet with the company. We meet again the next day. We meet again the next day. We do a bunch of references to our network. And then if we think it's interesting, we give them the term sheet. We usually invest between, I would say, 3 to 8 million at the seed for 20% of the company, or in this case, 15, because they were a little further along. And yeah, I think it was a pretty easy decision because we had a thesis, but it was like 20,000 sandboxes in April. Last week, they've done 1 million sandboxes. So like the growth of the company, it just kind of like skyrocketing. And again, it just like the founders are just like out there. Like you go to an event in SF and you meet 30 founders. Even if like 3 of them use the product and you do that every night, like the rate of growth and iteration that you have is extremely high. So that's something that we put a lot of emphasis in the founders too. It's like, do you actually want to do the work of going out there and talking to people and like having people tell you, no, I don't actually like your product. Like their docs sucked. I was like, guys, your docs suck. I don't know why people use it, but they were still using it. So I'm like, imagine if they were good, how many more people would do it? So, and they were like, yeah, I agree. A lot of other founders I work with are like, well, yeah, they could be better, but like, I'm doing this other thing, or like blah, 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 and they just come up with excuses. I think that's like the biggest differentiator between like companies that have success and companies that don't, is like, are you actually open-minded to being wrong and be like, yeah, what I was doing was not good enough. I should be doing it differently. I'm gonna make the change. Versus we have other companies that are like a lot of users and I'm like, guys, this product is really not that good. Like people are using it, but it could be a lot better. And they're like, well, but they're using it. So why should I improve it? So well, you're never gonna be a big company if you're like okay with what you have today, So it's kind of hard to suss that out in the investment period. That's why we spend a lot of time in the community, with founders. But yeah, that's a company that's doing very, very well. And if you're a systems engineer, they're hiring, so maybe that's, and they do a lot of H-1B visas because they have a bunch of people that they brought from the Czech Republic. So that's one way to look at it.
What's the name of the company again?
E2B. E2B.dev.
Were they a unique product? Because like I couldn't find any other code interpreter online when I needed.
Yeah, you would think that's like the easiest thing. Like if you just look at it, you're like, well, that cannot be that hard, right? But then like nobody does it because there's like all these weird things that you need to, assure on the infrastructure side that are like actually not that easy to build out. So yeah, there's really not many. There's a couple more now that are popping up, but I think like once you're like implemented in all the frameworks and all that, it's kind of hard to break that loop.
You mentioned like the H-1B, like can you like maybe talk a little bit about like the immigration process, like if you are, I don't know, in high school or like a young student, like what will you do? Like maybe the H-1B, like the O1?
Yeah, I would say the O1, which is the alien with extraordinary ability visa, it's actually not that hard to get. Like I've seen a lot of people get it, and I don't know if they're really extraordinary. I would say the number one thing again is like writing. So when you apply for a O1 visa, they're gonna be like, what are like websites you've been featured in? What are like events that you spoke at? What are like hackathons that you judge? What are like blah blah blah? They don't. I mean, it's not like the people at the CBP are like AI experts that are like, wow, the article was not very interesting, or like it's more about like the volume and being out there. So I would say doing more of that, like writing more, and and it's fine to be wrong, like just put your ideas out there, and then sometimes you'll be surprised you actually have a unique insight that people didn't think about. Sometimes people might say, man, that's really dumb, and it's like, at least you learned it, right? Otherwise, you're still thinking it, but nobody told you that it's dumb, and you kind of like live your life thinking that. So, and then just do what you really care about. I would say I grew up. My dad delivers fish to restaurants, and my mom was a cashier. So like neither of them had very high opinions on like what I should be doing in university or whatnot. And I started studying physics. And I would see the people that were doing like postdoc work, and I'm like, man, that's not gonna be me. Like it's just not, I don't really like the academia life. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll do computer science. And then I was studying computer science, and all this stuff that I was getting taught was like not really actionable. You're kind of like in the classroom and like you're learning Java, and it's like, yeah, that's cool, but like nobody really uses this. And then you're doing your software engineering too, and it's like you're learning Prolog, and it's like, that's cool, but like, can we at least like use Python or like, kind of learn some new stuff? And at least maybe that's like, partially like a Italy thing, less of like a
I've studied here in the States, and
yeah.
You get to learn at least Prolog, why.
Right. Yeah. So, and I understand it's like, hey, look, it's interesting to learn functional programming for like 2 weeks, not for a class, Anyways, and then the day that I quit school, I had this professor in software engineering too, and he was like, oh, he asked me something, and I gave him an explanation. He's like, with the way you're thinking, like you're never gonna be able to work abroad. And I was like, first of all, what do you know about working abroad? You've been a professor the whole time. And I was already working for a company based in Silicon Valley, like remotely. So I was like, I mean, clearly you don't really know what you're talking about. So I was like, okay, I'm not gonna come to class anymore. But I'm still enrolled, so I could go back to Tor Vergata anytime and keep, just pay a lot of fines for not having paid all my classes. But I was like, look, and my mom was like, maybe you should just get a degree and then you can do whatever, because, she doesn't have a degree and my dad doesn't have a degree. And they're like, it seems like the thing that people do, they get a degree, which makes sense for a lot of people, right? But I think there's not really any risk to dropping out and then going back, like, if you try and do something and then you fail, you can go back. I have a lot of my friends that stay in school the whole time. It still took them 6 years to get a degree. So it's like, it would have taken the same amount of time for the both of us to do it. So yeah, I would say just do what you find interesting. And a lot of times, now it's easier, but like a lot of times the people that share your interests are gonna be online. They're not gonna be in your neighborhood. They're not gonna be at your school. They're not gonna be kind of like close to you. So you have to go out and try and find it. Today, it's really easy with like Discord, with Twitter, with some of these communities, but I would say back then it was maybe a little harder. So it's easy to say, well, nobody here is doing startups, so why should I do startups? And obviously you've already done one step more than most people, which is coming here and like trying to get exposure to it. So yeah, just keep doing what you think will help you the most. It's hard for people to give you advice. And also if the person giving you advice is not doing something that you wish you were doing, at best, the advice that they give is going to take you to the same place where they are, so that should help you decide what to listen to.
When you're evaluating a pitch, is it any similarity to when you're interviewing staff to bring on board to a company? And what types of questions are you bringing them with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the more people you have on a company, the less you want somebody who will be a founder. So usually when you're a founder, you are somebody who is kind of like never settles, you're kind of like always trying to make things better. You have a super high sense of urgency. You're somebody who's like really trying to push you're trying to create something that doesn't exist and that most people have not been able to create before. The further along you go in the journey of a company, the more you're gonna need the yin to the yang, right? So it's kind of like Sheryl Sandberg and like Mark Zuckerberg are like the usual example. It's like, hey, at some point, you kind of need the person that is more detail-oriented, is more analytical, that maybe does not work 100 hours a week, but like is always on top of like all the things that she or him are assigned to. So yeah, I would say the main difference is like, if I'm bringing, like we just had one Series B company that we hired a CRO for. And if you're running revenue at a company that is like, 5-6 million in revenue, you cannot be somebody who's like blowing things up every other week. Like, you're kind of like investing you're burning every year, like, $10-50 million on like go-to-market. Is like, you need to have a plan, and you need to think it through and you need to stick to it and see how it works. And then obviously you have to pivot, but it's less of the founder, which is like, at the seed stage, if you're doing something and it doesn't work for a month, I'm not saying you got to do something else, but you got to change something. Like if nobody cares, like by default, you're like dead as a startup. Like nobody cares, like nobody uses you, So that's kind of how things change. And but I would say the same thing between a pitch and hiring somebody is like finding somebody who's actually passionate about the place that they're in, So a lot of people now want to work in AI because AI is like hot, but like they don't really care about it. Or like, and you just ask them, it's like, if you ask about anything that is slightly unrelated to what they do, but in the same area, and they don't know about it, like that's like a really red flag. There was some drama on Twitter, but that is like Product Hunt offsite. And Product Hunt is like this place where like indie hackers and like builders push new projects that they built. And one of their guys was talking to the CTO, and he was like, "Oh, Peter Levels is like a great person." The guy's like, "Who is Peter?" And it's like, this guy's like the #1 person that everybody in like this space knows about. It's like saying you're an AI and somebody's like, "Oh man, Sam Altman is like so strange," and you're like, "Who's Sam Altman?" I'm like, how do you work in AI? Like, it's just not possible for the two things to be together. So usually that's like what it looks like. Or like you might ask a founder, it's like, "What do you think of this startup?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't know them." It's like, how do you not know them? Like, you should know every company you're like fighting against, Like, so that's always there, no matter who you are. But I would say the urgency and some of those things can be a little different when you hire later on. Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course.
I don't know how to put it, but I will try my best.
Yeah.
In a very manner that will be pretty understanding. So when internet came, like there was a lot of design-oriented applications that came out, like for example, Squarespace, Wix, Figma took space. Like Figma just like overtook all the other applications that were there. And now in the similar era, like there's AI coming with, like there's new productions with Framework and Claude AI that will help you build these platforms. So what do you think the future of design and tech is, like if it's going to work together in the near future?
I would say maybe the last 30 years was like how to make design, like how to make software easier to interact through a screen. So, it starts with a command line, and then obviously the interfaces get better. I think maybe we're going the other way now, which is almost like, why do I have to use software at all, right? So if you're using Microsoft Word to write an essay, like the whole UI and product needs to be built keeping in mind that you're gonna type every character. So it's like, spell check, it's like all these different things. Now, if you're going to a Word where most of the text is like at first generated by an AI, the whole way you're building a product is like completely different, Like if an AI is writing your first draft, there's no need for a spell checker. Like an AI just cannot make a typo, There's like all these different things. Or like you should never suggest, how you have those blue lines on Word where it's like, hey, you should add this thing here, like you should rephrase it. That should also not exist anymore. It should automatically be implemented into your text. So we might get to the point where instead of having a text editor, you kind of have these like personas that you talk to, which is like, hey, this is like my sales outbound persona. And it's like, I need to write a new sales email. I just ask them, write a good email for sales outbound. And you just get back the email. You never interact with like the actual software to write it, So I think it's kind of moving from software, which was like first on-prem software. So you would go and buy Microsoft Office, you would install it, you would use it. And then you add SaaS, which is like the software is in the cloud, you kind of connect to it, and the software updates at a much faster rate, because instead of having to re-download and update every time, like every day I can push it to production. And now it's almost like nobody really cares about the software. It's like the labor is like what gets transmitted between the two. So even if you're a software engineer and you've tried using Cursor or some of these like AI IDEs, you're kind of looking at Cursor write the code. Like you're maybe writing code 10%, 15% of the time, but the whole design of the product is made with you having to write all of it in mind, you know? So now everything kind of needs to change. And so I think design is more about kind of like human to AI design, you know? Like I think we're still gonna have kind of like human computer interfaces, which are like traditional design, but then you have this all other thing of like, okay, if I'm talking to an AI and I'm asking it to do a job for me, when is it supposed to reply? You know, like I'm okay for the model to take 5 hours to respond if the result is much better, you know. But today we don't really have these loops. Like if you use any AI chat tool, you write and then it responds right away. Even O1, which they're like, you know, it has like more chain of thought and kind of like tree search and all these things, it's still like 30 seconds, you know. But like, why can I not ask for it to take an hour, 10 hours, 2 days, 10 days, whatever that might be? So I think that's where things are going to change, where now all of a sudden it's like, okay, the model is the interface where the request goes, and then the model has to kind of connect to all these different tools. So how are you making the tools easy for the model to interact with, not easy for the person to interact with? Most product design today is terrible for models because it's so many usage patterns that like are gonna work a certain way, but like they're really not descriptive, you know? So I think you're gonna see a lot of change in that, but I think there's still a lot of value in design, just in different, it's more like review than creation now it's gonna be. So you're gonna have to rethink what goes into the product.
I just have another follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead. Then.
So, I'm a product designer and strategist, so that's where my design questions
Mhm.
come from that angle. So, as a person who is not too much associated with tech in terms of like the future of AI and wants to be in the startup industry, what advice would you have for me who is completely out of the tech area and where we look at the entire startup ecosystem and even future of businesses going towards integrating AI and all those technologies within their upcoming new ventures or ideas?
I would say the main thing is there's going to be more vertical understanding. So I think today, if you're a designer, you know front-end technologies, you know some design, but you don't really have to have a lot of vertical expertise about an industry to work in it. I think with AI, so much of the importance is like what data you package into the context window, that it's more going to be, instead of like right now you build software, we basically like, you can get anything out of it, and then we build this UI for like you to go figure out what exactly you need. Like the future is more like, what is this person needing based on the task that they want to solve, you know? Like VC is a great example. Anybody who's not worked in venture capital and tries to build software for venture capitalists fails, because from the outside, this job looks a certain way, which is like you just sit there and like people talk to you and like you decide who to give money to. But like in reality, it's like a lot more proactive than it looks like. Like I meet 90% of the companies that I meet, I reached out to talk to. They're not inbound pitches that come. So it's almost like from the outside, you think that you got all these deals just raining on you, and it's like you're just going to events and meeting people, but like it's very different. So in any vertical, when you're designing a product today, it kind of looks the same. You know, it all looks like a spreadsheet. It all looks like a table. It all looks like a search bar. Like those primitives of design are the same across industries, even though the industries are like very different. You know, like my mom, now she works in like a movie accounting. And it's like the software that they use is the same software that like somebody could use to do accounting for construction. The same software that somebody could do to do accounting for whatever. So I think now it's almost like if you don't really know the specifics of a market, it's kind of hard to get a job in that space. So I would maybe say, okay, what are like the 1-2 industry where like I want to spend time on, really understand what matters, what are like the workflows that people have. It's like if you take like if you ask somebody, like if you did an expense report software, it's kind of different depending on what industry you work on. There's kind of like different compliance. Say you expense a dinner. If you work at Google as an engineer and you expense a dinner, it's fine. If you work in sales and you expense a dinner, actually you can get in trouble because it can be like, kind of pay to play. You're basically like paying for a client dinner to then get the software bought. And it's like, okay, now how do you add the review? And if I'm a venture capitalist and I take somebody to dinner, if there's somebody who's a politician, I can actually get in trouble because we're not supposed to be involved in like fundraising. There's kind of like all these vertical things that if you're building an horizontal software, you don't know. And what happens today is like they build the horizontal software and then you can build your own workflows on top of it. But I think now with AI, it's actually like, how do you build a full vertical thing? So the whole design and product design kind of changes a lot.
Yeah, thanks so much for the talk, Lisa. The question that I had is, with AI pervading almost all of the industries that we all know and understand today, what do you think of roles like product management? I'm not talking about project management, where it's mostly execution and scheduling milestones. I'm talking about product management, where you are mostly, or the product manager is mostly responsible for setting the vision for a product, roadmap, and all of that. How do you see those roles evolving? And or what is the general opinion on that? And how will those roles evolve, keeping the essence of the role itself?
Yeah, I think the best way to just think about any job in AI is any job is kind of like a skill gap. So there's like a skill floor, which is like what's like the minimum amount of thing you need to know to have that job. And then there's the skill ceiling, which is like, if you're like Michael Jordan in basketball, you're like Tiger Woods in golf, like there's nobody that can be better than you. I would say any job where you have a very small gap between the two, it's gonna get commoditized by AI very quickly. So if you think about customer support, the worst person doing customer support, it's really not that much worse than like the best person. At the end of the day, if I call you to like cancel my internet, it's like there's not many ways that the conversation can go. Either you help me do it or you don't. If you're thinking about project management, is very straightforward. Product management is a lot more nuanced, So like project management, you're just taking tasks and you're kind of like orchestrating them. Yeah. I think models are like, even like the worst person at the job is pretty close to the best person, right? You're kind of just keeping people on track. Versus on product, the best person at building product is a lot better than the worst person at building product, So I think as long as the job is kind of like this high skill gap, you're basically gonna have the bottom of the market get replaced by AI. So if you're not that good, like there's gonna be some AI-driven way to do it, which is not perfect, but like you're not perfect either. And then if you're like in the middle or kind of like higher tier of your job, you're just gonna get pushed up by using AI to be more productive. So now you're gonna use some AI-enabled product management tool that now instead of needing 3 PMs, you're just gonna have 1. And now you're gonna make more money because obviously you're, if you have budget to pay 3 people and then you have 1, you might not get the salary of 3 people, but maybe you get like 2 or like 1.5. And so either you get moved up or you just kind of like have to go do another job. And I think actually, you're Singaporean, right? Yeah, so Singapore is a great example. They have this basically like a career transition plans. And they have these kind of jobs where they're like, look, this job is just not gonna exist anymore. So they're basically helping people like retrain and like leave their job behind and go find something else to do. Yeah, I don't think product management is anywhere close to that, but I think there are a lot of jobs like customer support. If you think about it, checkout at a store, most people use self-checkout because again, the best cashier is not that much better than like the worst cashier. Like you just gotta scan the items or pay, So any like always think about that when you look at jobs. Is like, what's the gap between the best and the worst person?
Thank you.
Of course.
Before you mentioned the cybersecurity driving a lot of innovation beside AI, and what do you think about innovation in the field? Like, how are you going? And do you see some intersection with AI now, like AI for security?
Yeah. So we do a lot in cybersecurity, and some of our founders, I would say, are kind of like security celebrities. So like H.D. Moore, who's like a very famous hacker, who broke into like the DoD at like 16 years old and got pulled out of high school. So what is happening in security? There are 2 things. So one, AI is lowering the cost of attacks. So take a phishing attacks. I send you an email, I pretend to be somebody. You get in a lot of them. They're like, there's like typos, or like they're saying something that doesn't really apply, or it's like, the Nigerian prince thing. They're just trying to send the same thing to everybody. Now with AI, you can like write super personalized emails that are like very well written. So they're actually really hard to like figure out whether or not it's a real person. Same with voice, people can clone your voice and they can kind of call you and be like, hey, it's me, just send me the money. So now if you're on the defense side, there's no way that you can scale like your human security engineers to match the volume of inbound attacks. So we have all these like AI-driven tools that are using AI to like categorize some of these things. So we have one company called Dropzone AI, which is a SOC analyst. So what SOC analysts do is basically like, you work at JP Morgan Chase, you get a phishing email, you forward that email to like the security person, and you're like, hey, I got this attack, like add it to like the rules in our software. What Dropzone does is basically like, it does that job for the easiest ones to spot. And on average, it costs $35 to review one alert for like an actual person, because they make 140 grand a year. With Dropzone, it costs like $6. So now you have the cost of attack going down. So now you have to bring the cost of defense down. So that's one area, kind of using AI for like security review. The other one is AI red teaming. So most companies today have to pay red teamers to try and break into their company and see where the flaws are. It's kind of expensive, so you do it, and then you maybe do it again 6 months from now, you do it again 6 months from now. In the 6 months gap, anything can happen, So now people use AI to have this like autonomous red teamers that are like trying to break into your system basically like every day, continuously. And they're also using AI to do a lot of training with people. So things like phishing or like social engineering, things like that. You can use LLMs to like pretend to be an attacker and, reach out to your employees to say, like the usual, like, hey, I'm the CEO, I need you to buy me like an Amazon gift card. It's like, I still don't know how people fall for that, but people fall for that. Like one of our interns actually fell for it. Somebody called them saying, hey, I'm John Sakota, my partner. It's like, I really need you to get some Amazon gift card right now. They're really urgent. And the guy just went and bought them. And I'm like, dude, why would we need Amazon gift cards? Like Slack, like right on Slack. It's like, but people do fall for it. So you need kind of like this autonomous training. And then, there's just like, anything that can help you, again, be more productive. Like before, it's funny, reading an email and understanding what it said 3 years ago, you needed like a whole team of machine learning engineers. You needed like a lot of expertise on staff to build these NLP models. Today, it costs like 1 cent using 4.0 Mini. So you're basically just changing the dynamics of a lot of these teams. So there's a lot going on there. And then the other thing is, as AI becomes a bigger driver of the economy, it's a lot more costly for some of these systems to go down, So if before maybe you're using, when the CrowdStrike thing happened, basically like all these airports, they couldn't use some of their computers anymore. You're like, well, they just use pen and paper, right? It's like, okay, I have a list and like I'm onboarding you. But if now the system is like the one actually doing the work and there's not a person and the system goes down, now you're like, okay, I don't have, like, I'm losing basically like money by the hour. So for example, we have one company called Census, which scans the whole internet. It's kind of like Google Maps for the internet. It knows on every single public IP address what is there and what that device is for. And so a lot of times, you might create an environment when you're a developer and then you forget it. And then it's like, oh shit, now they can get in. And so Census kind of helps you find those things. But they also have McDonald's as a customer because, you have all these like ordering machines at McDonald's. If the machines go down, you're not making money. So like, it's really like McDonald's is like as a really good security team because they're like, if somebody breaks into like the payment system and turns off all the McDonald's, like we're like screwed, So there's kind of like this convergence of like security and actual like business making. Before it was like, oh, they broke into our system, they downloaded the database, whatever, like we'll pay a fine and kind of move on. Now it's like, okay, I cannot do any of this. And then the extreme of it is like war, right? Like most systems today are kind of like AI enabled. You have like drones, you have all of these things. It's like, that's really a problem if people break in and kind of turn it down. So there's a lot of urgency on that too.
And do you see something going on regarding security for AI, like that poisoning of the
Um,
and stuff?
So we actually had one podcast episode with Nicolas Carlini. He works at DeepMind. And so what he did, one example of data poisoning. So as you know, basically these models take the internet, they read it, and then they kind of train on it. What they did with his team is like they bought all these like expired domains that were in the training data set, and they started putting all this like, malicious data into them, and then the data made it into the models. So there's like all these like new attack vectors that people weren't really thinking of before. Same with extracting data back from the models. I think that's why the Claude and ChatGPT, they're like so RLHF'd. It's so hard to make them say something that is like weird, because before when they first came out, people were getting like the system prompt in like 1 minute, and they were like getting it to like say all these weird things. Like now they're tightening it down. I would say most companies consume the models through an API. So it's kind of like they don't really care about AI safety. Like they just hope that OpenAI cares about AI safety. Same for Anthropic. But until you have people hosting their own models, like there's not really a market for AI security. I think people are building it, but it's kind of like, if you tell me that GPT-4 is not secure, what am I supposed to do, right? It's like, it's not mine. It's like, go call some mom, man. So, yeah.
So kind of an anecdote and then a conversation I had with Nadia this morning. Not getting it to say something funny, after you've been using it for days and days on end, having it process and summarize documents that finally spit out to me, you could just read these things yourself.
Right.
But so, I know Scott and I are both talking about this all day long, like, excited to get here for the afternoon. The idea that I'm pushing, it's that part of it is, I'm going to keep driving forward on it, that's that existential crisis of, if you are successful, you will disrupt and change a technical field that employs a couple 100,000 people in the US and probably 1 million around the world. To the point where you could see 70, 80% they're done because the automation of what they do takes over for them. How do you, when you're sitting down, either personally yourself or with a founder pitching something, is that something that you take into account and you think about? The level of disruption?
Yeah. That's always a hard question, because there's what people do today, and then there's what people could do. So the easiest way to think about it is like software engineer. People are like, well, AI is going to replace all the software engineers. But like, I do not know any company that has enough software engineers, right? So there's kind of like this latent demand for a lot of this work to be done that today is not filled. Same in security. It's like a lot of companies don't have enough security expertise on staff. So I think there's always like, okay, if you're changing the economics of a market, are you actually going to wipe away a lot of the jobs, or are you basically just increasing the productivity of companies? And that's going to be also a choice that's based on the employer, right? So you might say, I'd rather do the same amount of work with less people, or I might say, I just want to do more work using AI and keeping the same people. So I think that's what we haven't really figured out yet. I think public companies are obviously like very incentivized to cut costs and have better kind of like margin profiles on earnings. But then you have all these private companies which are like, hey, actually now as a consultancy, we can go after Deloitte because now we have AI to kind of help us scale the workload that we can handle like a lot more. So it's very nuanced, but I think a lot of people are definitely not going to have the same jobs that they have. It's just like, the same way when Autodesk came out, like everybody that was like a drawing person at an architect studio just didn't have a job anymore. You're kind of like compressing jobs together. What that did is like, now there's like a lot more architectural firms, or same with accounting. When spreadsheets came out, now you don't need all these accountants writing a ledger anymore, but a lot of people needed an accountant and couldn't afford one, So I think that's more where things are going to go. It's kind of like the long tail businesses will benefit from it. And like the people are going to be replaced. Like at JP Morgan Chase, there's like, I don't know, 50,000 people doing things they shouldn't be doing, Like they could go work at some other company, but they don't because the company cannot afford it. So you're kind of like, reshuffling the talent pool.
I have a question about the AI. I don't know. I always get mixed the names. I have a question. So basically now you have AI like available for everyone, like us and corporates and firms and that stuff. And you were talking about like McDonald's. You gave an example, and I see that the firms are protecting themselves from that, but I don't see us doing that. You know, we are using that. So if you are using, you are vulnerable.
Yeah, vulnerable.
Yeah, it's like having a phone with GPS. Obviously, someone can hack and
Right.
know exactly where you are. So, I don't know. So my question is, do you think, or do you know if there is anyone doing something about that, like protecting
Yeah.
personal use of it?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I would say you're always more vulnerable when you're using a decentralized system. So if you're using a model on your phone, then it's like, okay, somebody could have hacked it. I might have downloaded like a corrupted one or whatnot. When you're using OpenAI or you're using Claude, you're basically trusting them to be secure. And like, if OpenAI is not secure, the last person they're gonna go after is like you know, because OpenAI is like as a huge target on its back. So what I always tell people is like, look, as long as you're okay with the company providing the model and you think they're safer than you, honestly, like it always comes down to that, right? Who has better safety, like you or OpenAI? It's like probably them. You're okay. But I think it gets to like, you know, now if you're like downloading models to use locally, it's like, okay, where did the model come from? It's like, do you trust the source where it came from? You know, that's why Apple Intelligence is gonna have so much success, because it's like, okay, you already got everything that I have. You know, there's nothing Tim Cook doesn't know about me. So might as well put it in the model as well. But I would say that's also why a lot of people are worried about AI, because it's like, well, is it true because Sam Altman said it should be true, or is it true because it's true? You know, and like we don't actually own the model, right? Or take a dystopian future in which all work is done through a model that does everything for you, and you get cut off from the model. It's like now all of a sudden you don't have access to anything anymore. Or like when people say Waymo is going to replace all cars, it's like, what if you get banned from Waymo and you cannot use it and you don't have a car, and like nobody sells cars, and like you can never get around anymore, you know? So I think that's more of the risk, you know, is like becoming too reliant on like centralized systems. I wouldn't worry as much about, you know, obviously don't put your credit card number, and that's like the basic of, you know, they're still not going to use it or turn on it, but you know, yeah, I would more be worried about what's like your escape hatch from it, you know, which is why I think open source is really important, obviously, and like thank God for Mark Zuckerberg that is spending like billions every year to like train these models for us. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on O1 and like the new way of doing all that?
So yeah, O1, I've been saying the whole more tokens equal more thinking for a long time, and Andrej Karpathy said it before me, so I didn't come up with it. But he talked about it like 18 months ago. Obviously, he worked at OpenAI, so maybe that's why they built it. But this kind of goes back to like how much time you want the model to spend. Like before O1, there was no way to say think more. You could do, you know, think step by step and use all these like prompt engineering techniques, and it will kind of do it. But like the model was not tuned to go down that path. So I think what they're doing now is kind of like they build a chain of thought in the model, and then they're using tree search to like figure out, okay, which one is going to be the best options of them. So I think what that changes is the amount of inference required, you know? So if you are a provider like a GPU cloud, like Together AI or whatnot, and somebody releases an open source O1, do you have enough capacity to like run inference for this long for a lot of customers, you know? So I think it's more of a compute thing, because before it was like, so basically like before you spend 99%, no, you spend 80% on pre-training, you spend 15% on post-training, and then you spend 5% on inference. And so if you're offering inference, you only need 5%, you know, you don't need much. But now with O1, it's like, you know, 60% pre-training, 20% post-training, 20% inference. So now you need to have 4x the capacity to offer inference. All the models are kind of the same. You know, Sonnet 3.5, like 4.0, all these models are kind of the same. But like, if you project it forward, the amount of energy and water that you actually need to power these data centers is limited. So the reason why all these companies are spending so much on it is because once you got in the land and the water rights and the power, there's no way for anybody to compete, So that's why, I give this presentation to the Singaporean government about sovereign AI. It's basically like, if you are a nation state, you need to have a way to like have your own infrastructure to run AI models, to run some of this infrastructure, because first of all, for defense, right? If you're going to war with a company and your drones run their code on the data center of that country, like you're screwed, But then also for labor, if you are a government, you could offer, tax services through AI agents. You could offer, citizen kind of like outreach and things like that through your own kind of like AI data center. I think Italy has like 8 GPUs. They did this like FastWeb cluster, and it's like 16 or something like that. But the US is like some of the largest data centers commercially, and also kind of like at the government level. There's like this huge data center in Utah for like the NSA. It's like a 2 billion data center. And that's going to be nothing compared to like what OpenAI and Microsoft are building in Wisconsin and Ohio. So again, the world can only generate so much power. So if you don't have access to the power, the water, the data center, you can have the best model in the world, you got nowhere to put it. So there's kind of like the public challenge is like, what's the MMLU score of your next model? Behind the scene is like, did you get the piece of land in Nevada that is like the right solar power and that's the right wind, access, and it's like close to North Dakota so that we can get the stranded power from there. So I would say we haven't hit that part of the market because the demand is still so early. But, right now, I would say AI data center usage is maybe like, 1.5% of like electricity usage. Like in 4 or 5 years, it's projected to be like 20%. So 20% of all power in the United States will go to like AI. And the United States has a lot of power. Like we're not, like the US is not very dense. Like if you look at Europe, there's really not that much power to go around, So now all of a sudden it's like, well, in the US you can generate tokens at a much cheaper price and sell them back to Europe. And if I can wrap them as labor, now it's like, we call it like AI shoring. So first you had jobs, then you have offshoring, now you have AI shoring. You're kind of have an AI do the job. It kind of changes a lot of the dynamics. And in Southeast Asia, there's like a ton of like tax breaks that people are giving. Like Malaysia is becoming one of the biggest data center countries because they have cheap power, they have cheap labor, they have cheap land. So people are like NVIDIA's going there to build a data center, Microsoft to build in it. So that's kind of like the challenge within the challenge.
Do you think in that case transformers are like the wrong architecture?
I don't know what's with Singaporean and transformer hate, but every time I thought, I was talking with Russell Tam from Temasek, and he's like, what's after transformers? I'm like, I don't know, but nothing for now. Like we have, like there's definitely all these like, state-space model. I would say Stanford is probably one of the most advanced, Stanford and Berkeley on transformer architectures, but they have just not proven to scale at the same rate with the same amount of data. That's really what it comes down to. Like we might get to a point where you can generate so much synthetic data with transformers that you can then train some of these alternatives at the right data ratio. But today there's just not enough data to build like a 400B, alternative to transformers on state-space models or whatnot.
Get you switched off on.
Yeah, we can talk about football, whatever.
It's so decentralized versus centralized when it comes to data centers. There's a lot of siting that comes into play, both from location to power supply, location to water, but then it's also location to the hubs of where the work's actually being done. And just like power transmitted over, your voltage lines, you get latency or loss. So from those considerations, there's a lot of locations where you're seeing things get built here in the States, mainly, less so overseas, where it sounds like it's more of a political, we're offering you the best tax breaks versus, well, I'll switch gears again, semiconductors moving into Arizona,
right,
where there's no water. And they're going to build a massive factory that requires a lot of water. It didn't make sense, but they got the best tax breaks. Where do you have any insider vision
where
things like this are going?
Yeah, I think data centers, they used to be more like retail stores. So you want the data center to be as close to the user as possible to keep latency low. I think now, again, it's like, if you're training a model, you don't really care about the latency, so you can kind of shove that anywhere. It's almost, not almost, it's much easier to move bits than it is to move energy. So the crazy thing people say is like, well, why don't you just build a data center in space? Because it's easy to actually send the data back, but it's hard. Like, you can get a lot of power in space through solar, but like then you can just send the model back. So that's kind of the extreme. But yeah, I would say the energy prices really drive, right? Because water is the same, right? It's like we have unlimited water if you had enough energy to like clean it, right? Like you could like go get the water from the ocean and bring it to Arizona and then process it and then put it in the data center if you had enough energy for cheap and like the tax breaks to do it. So it all kind of comes down to that, and that's why you're having some of these like nuclear plant based like data centers, so that you have kind of like this huge amount of power in one place. But yeah, I think we're gonna get to the point where like the value of the models, the value that you can generate is gonna be so high, like it really doesn't matter if you're spending a lot more than normal just to run the data center, And like with zoning, you cannot really put them anywhere, So if you can get some good rights, even though you're not gonna have everything, right? You might have the land and cheap labor, but you're done at the water. It's like, we'll figure out the water, But that's at least today what people are doing.
What's that ratio they're trying to get between the power and water supply? They're trying to get it close to 1. And some of them were starting to get to 1.06, 1.08 on that ratio, and now it's starting to blow up again because of...
Yeah. I think AWS got into like 0.2 kilowatt per liter. But yeah, I mean, the new NVIDIA like racks, they need 2 liters per second. So it's just like a huge amount of water. That's for one rack. So if you're building, and one rack has like 32 GPUs, and like the XAI cluster is like 100,000 GPUs. So just think about how much water you need just to like cool it down, So today, I think you can bring the ratio down if you can get the cooling to work. So for example, they don't use optic cables, they use copper cables because of cooling. So optic cables would add another like 20 kilowatts of power. So they use copper, which is like less efficient because the cooling is not there. But maybe in the future, like you get better cooling, so you can use less power, There's kind of like, the math is kind of hard, but today it's just like a race to get these clusters online, which is, I mean, these models are like the fastest depreciating asset ever, right? Like you get a model like GPT 3.5, it's like cost us $100 million. 3 months later, it's like it's useless. Like nobody uses it, And so there's kind of like, that's why the price is so low, because it basically needs to get as much revenue back in the short window that the model is helpful. There's kind of like the providers don't really have a lot of pricing power. Like if people don't use the model in the next 3 to 6 months, they're never going to use it again. So we need to price it so that it's basically like impossible to say no. So the actual cost of serving with the power and the water is not really factored in today. It's kind of more like a race to get some of the money back so that they can then go back to Microsoft or Amazon and say, please give me more GPUs. But yeah, I think that will change it. I mean, they've done a lot on like rack optimization. It's kind of boring to go into all the details, but like now you can get 100 megawatts racks before you get 60 was kind of like the max. So they're increasing capacity but not efficiency, and then you kind of have the second side of the cycle, which is like, now that you have the best performance, we can make it more efficient, but it takes time.
Do you know what the inside story is for the XAI, like racking all the GPUs in like 17 days? Like how did that go?
Yeah, Elon was there. He was plugging them in one by one. I mean, there's really no story, just like, well, one, government help. So the reason why these things take so long is like permits, right? So there's 2 ways. Either you get the permits expedited or you don't follow the permits. I think it's a mix of both, Like the cluster was ready before they even had the power to turn it on. So they basically like put all the cluster together, couldn't even turn on. And then eventually they got Tennessee to like turn on the TNA to turn it on. I think it's just how Elon works. Just like, hey, look, you got to do it. Like, you got to grab the rocket with the thing. So people are like, oh shit. It's like, if anything, like these are like like that's the type of complexity that is like horizontal, right? So if you think about any data center, if you had 1 billion people, you could build it in 1 hour, right? Because they're all like doing work. And then like what Elon is great at is like taking a small amount of people and like making them as productive as like a much larger group, usually by just working 20 hours a day, which is not, it's not scalable, but yeah, so there's no fun inside story that I've heard. Beyond that, just people, they're literally just leaving there. They would just take a nap, get up, keep racking things. There's not a lot more.
So you used the word permits there in answering this question. So the Air Force Base outside of Lemoore, down in San Joaquin Valley, has just entered into a cooperative agreement. I cannot remember the data center company and the energy company to do solar battery storage and a data center that will supply the needs for that Air Force installation. I don't think they're talking about coming online until 2026 because they have to go through the environmental review process.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's kind of the whole meme about the Department of Government Efficiency by Elon Musk, right? It's like, hey, like we got to test that like the SEALs are not going to be unhappy with the rockets. And it's like, well, maybe we've gone too far, but yeah, but I think again that's like the startup opportunity in a lot of these things. Like for this way, there's nothing to get around. But if you think about deploying AI, there's going to be more and more regulation. And if you're like a large company, you have to follow it. If you're a startup, you're like, you know what? If they catch me, we'll figure it out. But like most of the time, they're not gonna care, right? Because again, nobody cares about your startups. Like nobody cares that you don't follow the permit. Nobody cares about anything. So in a way, some of the AI regulation is gonna help some startup fight if they want to start it. But at the same time, I think now after social media and like some of like the election interference in like 2016. There's like a lot more focus from the government on like tying this down. And you've seen like Anthropic is like trying to get this AI regulations done as soon as possible because obviously Anthropic is like, these models are so dangerous. And then they buy the billboards at the airport. It's like, use our model. And I'm like, well, I cannot reconcile the two. So yeah, permits are strange. But I would say, coming from Europe, it's like, man, this is nothing, right? Like if you're trying to do a startup in Italy, like the amount of paperwork you need to do just to start. Like you literally don't do anything. It's like you haven't even built anything. You got to get all these things. So I think the US is still, even with the slowdowns.
Do you think ASICs solve the need for large data centers?
Yeah. So ASIC is basically like, instead of getting these chips that like you can reprogram to do things, you kind of like burn the model on the chip. So it's kind of like static forever. I don't think you can build one fast enough for the models to still be relevant once it's pressed, like, again, it takes like maybe a year to like tape a new chip. So you design the chip. It's like, it's kind of like Cerebras, right? Cerebras is like, oh, okay. So these GPUs have 20 megabytes of SRAM. We're gonna make a chip with 44 gigabytes and it's gonna fit the whole model. And then they're like, we built a 400B parameters model that is 130 gigabytes. I'm like, oh shit. It's like, how are we gonna do that? So now the chip is like too small. Now you have to connect even multiple of those chips and they have to come up with this whole like waste streaming thing because it's just like a mess. So if you think about the same thing about ASIC, it's like, okay, I'm gonna do a Llama 2 70B ASIC. You probably get it today. And you're like, hey guys, I got the Llama 2 70B. It's like, throw it in the trash. Nobody's gonna use it. So yeah, maybe you can see a future in which you get an ASIC done in 3 months. Then maybe it's interesting, but yeah, Jensen is getting all the capacity.
In your discussion, you reminded me of how floppy disk, CDs, all of that phased out when cloud started coming on.
Right.
So, yeah, and then cloud's obviously like powered by data centers. It's not a question, I just like...
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I just interviewed Drew Houston, who's the CEO of Dropbox. So Dropbox was one of the first companies to move out of the cloud. All they do is like store files, right? So they were like, why, like a hard drive is much cheaper than paying the S3 price for AWS. So they build their own data centers. And I asked him, when are you gonna build your own AI data center? He's like, I'm not buying that. It's like the rate of depreciation of these things is so quick. Like imagine if you had, it's not a great example, but like imagine if you bought a hard drive that is like 100 gigabytes and you can fit 100 files, and then the next month the next best file is like 1 terabyte, and now you got to throw the hard drive away. Like you would never buy one, you would just use the cloud, right? Like today you can still use it if you want, but like with AI it just doesn't make sense to buy your own thing. You're just better off just always using the on-demand thing. Next.
Now figure out how to sell a transition where you're using cloud-based services, but your employer or customer base absolutely has no idea what it is, even though they run multi-million-dollar agricultural businesses. We switched to Ignition as a SCADA software, and it's all cloud-based. And that's because we got hacked last year. And they thought we were making ourselves the most vulnerable outfit out there going to a cloud-based service, ignoring the fact that it was more secure than what we were doing.
Yeah. Many such cases.
And you are recording that, aren't you? Don't put that on.
Cut that. Hey. Hello? Any other questions people have on life, on career? Doesn't have to be about AI or cybersecurity or whatever else.
Have you ever thought of working?
No, I don't think so. I'm in this WhatsApp group with Google people that play soccer. Literally every other day they're like, yo, let's go play soccer. I'm like, how? It's like 1 p.m. What are you guys doing over there? It's like, what's going on at Google? So I think obviously they're like, you can like have a lot of impact. You can have like a lot of impact, but you can also end up working with a bunch of people that are like not really trying to do a lot. Google just had the Notebook LM product, like the audio podcast thing. And we interviewed the creators on the podcast, and they were like, I was just like I was working on other teams, and I was so frustrated because it's like, maybe you're on the payments team. And it's like, there's not really much to innovate on payments at Google when you have 10,000 people working on it. There's just not enough surface area. So I think it can be tough to work in these big companies. It's kind of like, oh, I've added this new button to Google Docs. Spent 3 months doing that. It's like, okay, well, I don't know. Doesn't sound,
One of the speakers that we had during the event, I won't name him, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to, he shared the same sentiment regarding, this company that you were talking about. I'm being very diplomatic here. Yeah, so he shared the exact same sentiment, and I get the sense that people with that startup and working for a startup kind of bone, it's either that or nothing for them. Startups are nothing. I mean, there's no going into these big companies.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say it's really like, what do you want to do, right? So there's really only 2 ways to work, which is like either you do nothing and you work at some of these big companies and you're kind of like, you go there at 10 a.m., you have lunch, you work a little, and then at 4 p.m. you go home. Or you should just work on a startup, right? There's almost like no reason to work in the middle, where you're working at a company that is already large, but it's not a very large company. If you're working at a company that has been 500 people for like 3, 4, 5 years, you're kind of wasting your time, right? It's like you don't get the benefits of not working at the big company, and you don't get the benefits of like having the startup exposure, So yeah, that's kind of how I've always looked at it. One day maybe I'll go. If you ever see me, it's like, oh, he doesn't want to work anymore. It's like, but yeah, they're just different environments.
So I like how you compared. You just equated doing nothing to working in big tech.
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up in Rome. I was like, man, one day I hope I could work at Google. And now I'm here. I'm like, man, I would never work at Google. It's like, right? Because again, when you're outside of it, you're like, well, these companies must have the smartest people in the whole world. And then you live here and you're like, if you're a smart person, why would you do that? Like, why would you work? Like, obviously there's a lot of smart people at Google, but it's like, if you're somebody who's like really driven, like you could go work at a startup and learn a lot more, work with smart people, potentially make a lot of money. There's just like not a lot of reasons to like not do it if you really care, If I didn't care, I gotta stay in Italy, right? It's like, you can find a job, maybe. Not that easy, but yeah. But at least remotely you can find a job. So yeah, that's always my, when people ask me why I moved here, it's like, look, if you want to do early stage venture capital, like startups, it's like, you should just live here, right? Like you can give yourself 100 reasons to not do it and be somewhere, but like if you take yourself and you remove everything, existing relationships, like where you were born and all of that, and you were like a blank slate, and you're like, I want to do startups, where should I go live? There's no reason why you would say anything outside of the Bay Area, Then obviously you have, my family is here and like my friends are here and all of that, or my husband is here, whatever, like that changes the thing, but otherwise, yeah.
Are you thinking like doing a startup like in the future, like being a founder again?
Maybe I would say it's much easier to do a startup the first time than the second time, because the first time you're like, what could go wrong? It's like, sounds like fun. The second time you're kind of like, how am I gonna get people to care, right? So I would say today there are a lot of interesting ideas, but there's nothing that I'm like, man, I just want to do that 100% of the time. That's why I like being in VC. I think there's like a lot of things that I'm interested in that I can help founders that are really passionate, and a lot of the learnings are kind of like the same for everybody. But yeah, I mean, if I had an idea that I really wanted to care and like work on, I would do it. But I mean, you got to work like a lot as a founder. Like I think I work a lot now, but like if you're as a founder, you're basically like working. There's not a time you're not working, right? Because if it doesn't come from you, it doesn't come from anybody. At least like in our job, it's like we have a partner. We have 4 partners, so we can all work together. You're trying to allocate resources, so you're more like picking. You're not originating a lot of time, which is it's hard to pick, but it's hard to originate. Like to come up with a net new idea that resonates with customers, that resonates with people that want to come work with you, that resonates in the broader market. Like it's really, really hard, and like it just doesn't happen overnight. Any startup that you see that is like an overnight success is somebody who's been working on it a lot. It might not be a long time. Again, that's kind of like the thing about the Bay Area too. It's like some things just kind of like snowball and become successful they don't become successful, they become popular in a short time. So you might say, oh wow, this person got lucky, but it's just kind of like repetition. So.
I have a question that is more like from a personal point of view. So I am from Portugal, and that's very important for what I'm going to say. It's basically like, don't you think that people like who want to come here start at Google or those kind of big places to get some money to then do the startups? Or like, because you are talking in the way you are talking, like, I just came here. That if I wanted to do that, like, I wouldn't be able. I needed to like have money to eat, of course, everyone does. But like, maybe like to ensure that I have something, like I want to do startups and those kinds of things, but I need like I'm not saying a backup plan, but like I need to have. I still need
Yeah.
to do that. So what's
Yeah.
your vision on that?
So
do you see a lot? Do you see people like in those big companies
Mhm.
that were obviously staying there for like 1 year and then jumping to the things that they really want to do?
So there's one book called The Monk and the Riddle, which is basically this idea of like, hey, I'm doing this thing that I don't like, so that then one day I can do the thing that I like. I'm just basically like, well, and in the book, it's basically like actually a startup founder. It's like, well, I'm doing today the startup for funeral homes to help schedule like funerals, which I don't really want to do, but it seems like a good market. And then when I sell the company, I can do the company that I actually care about. This is not similar, but it's like you just got to do what you care about today. So if what you really care about is doing a startup and you cannot move here, that's fine. Like when I started working remotely, I was like for Italy making a lot of money. If you work remotely from Portugal for a US company, you can make a lot of money. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna save the money. I'm not living within the means of what I'm earning. I'm just saving the money. And then when I moved to the US, I had some money saved, not a lot, but anyway. So it's like, okay, if you care about tech, what's the closest that you can get while still home? I don't think it makes sense to move here to work at a big company, because you can work for the big company from Portugal, right? Or you can work for some other company remotely and like make, 60, 70, 80K, whatever, as a remote salary and save the money. Versus if you come here and you work at Google 1 year, it's like, you're not really gonna save much because it's expensive to live here. So the first year that you live here, you're not really saving any money. So then you get to the second year and you're like, well, I still don't really have a lot of money, but now I've been at Google and it's like the free lunch is nice. And it's like, all these things are nice. So
You don't see a lot of people like in those big companies?
no, I would say people that want to do it, they just come here and try and do it. Like they live with like 4 or 5 people, they just live very cheaply and they just try and make it. And maybe 6 months later they go home, like it's not like you have to like come here and live here forever, like if it doesn't work out, especially if you're lucky that you have like a family or somebody back home that you can kind of go back to. But yeah, I would say it's hard, but also what really matters is like the momentum that you feel. So like if you kind of like live your life, oh, I'm doing this thing that is like not really exciting to me, just so then maybe I can do the other thing later, then you kind of like internalize it, You're kind of like, okay, well, you spend a whole year like not being excited about what you do. And it's like, okay, it's kind of a drag, And then the next year you're like, well, again, I still don't have a lot of money. I have some money, I could do it, but I'm like, I kind of had a rough year, so I kind of want to take it easy, Like maybe I'll just stay a little longer and like hang out a little more. And then it's like the right time never comes, because you're like, you don't have like the spring to do it. Versus like when you want to do it, it's like, how can I make it happen right now? And then if I fail, it's fine. But then at least like I feel like I'm making progress and I'm like working towards something. So it's easier said than done, right? It's scary to say, well, I'm quitting my job, I'm quitting school, whatever, and I'm gonna try and do this. But that's why there's startup opportunities, right? Because most people are scared.
You were saying like you were in university and you quit your job, and you were talking about that like that was a difficult decision for you or a very easy one?
No, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, it was much harder for me to like leave my family behind, right? Like it's much easier to say I'm not going to school anymore. Especially in the beginning, right? When you first quit, you're like, oh man, I'm just like Steve Jobs, right? I'm quitting school, I'm starting a company. This is great. Versus moving here, it's like, when I moved to New York first, I was like, okay, well, I'm leaving my family behind. I'm leaving all of my friends behind. I'm kind of going to a new place where like, especially in New York, it's like nobody really cares about what you do. You're kind of like there and like everybody's around you, but it's like you're like they don't care. So luckily, my wife and I were together, so I wasn't going completely alone. But I would say that's a lot harder because the way you like miss your family when it's like the holidays or whatever is like much harder than saying I missed 1 year in school. It's like nobody really cares, But like you were not there for your mom's birthday or whatever, like you feel worse about that. So yeah, and that also like this job you cannot really do it for 1 year. You're gonna like need to do it for 3, 4, 5 years to just see how the companies progress. So you're kind of making a longer term commitment versus if you want to build something, it's like, hey, look, either you're gonna know very quickly. You don't need 5 years to know if a startup is gonna work. You're gonna know in like 12 months. So you're like, hey, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna live with 4 people in Ace Valley. I'm gonna pay $900 a month for a room. It's like, hey, it might work, might not work, whatever. Yeah, again, it sounds easy, right? But yeah, there's no alternative to being scared.
What would be your advice specifically in the context of immigrants? Nobody, I'm not.
Yeah.
They don't come from here at this point.
So, well, the visa was easy because my wife is American. So that took care of itself. Funny enough, my wife. Use your time wisely. No, jokes aside. So we actually got married in Italy and lived in Italy for a while, and then we moved back to the U.S. after, so it was unrelated. But on the startup thing, again, I would say you might feel, when you're outside of the Bay Area, you might feel special that you're interested in startups. So, and you might see people around you that are like, oh, you're a founder, you're like so cool. Here, you literally go anywhere. It's like, I work in startups, I'm a founder. It's like, nobody cares. It's like, it's really not cool. You know, it's almost like, oh man, this guy is like a plumber. It's like, that's cool. Like, I don't know how to fix my toilet. It's like, you know, that person is special. So if you're only coming here because you want to be involved, like, you're gonna get bored with it very quickly. You know, you're like, man, I almost want to go back home. Versus if you like care about what you're doing, obviously it's like a lot different. You know, you're like, I care about what I'm doing. That's why I'm moving. Versus like, I'm moving because I care, and hopefully then I find something there. You know, I think that's even harder.
More on the side of you have to be obsessed with the idea.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a way to build a company, because again, everybody's gonna tell you your idea sucks. Everybody that you're gonna hire is gonna be like, this doesn't sound like a good idea. I'm not joining. Every customer is gonna be like, no, I'm buying CrowdStrike, I'm buying the OpenAI model, blah, blah, blah. I'm not using your thing. You're gonna go to the press and try and do an announcement for your round, and they're gonna be like, this doesn't sound like an interesting thing to cover. Every company sounds like yours. You're gonna go to investors, and they're gonna be like, I'm not gonna invest in your company. So if you don't care about the idea, why would you do it? It's almost like not care, but like, you know, if you're not super passionate, like, you just have to have almost like a unnatural confidence and like belief in the idea, you know?
I guess I have to reframe my question to, do you have to have expertise in that idea? Like, I think that would sort of agree with what Voyager said also to us. Do you have to understand the tech fully to care about an idea, and then, you know, start building around that? Or, you know,
I think, yeah, I mean, I think like the basic way to reframe the question is, are you gonna have more probability of success than not? Obviously, you're gonna have more probability of success if you know more. Are there ways to overcome that? Yes. But every startup is like, it's never you against the world. It's always you against a bunch of other startups against the world. So if you're behind on the tech, you need to be ahead on something else, or the odds are just like, you know, against you, you know?
Thank you.
Of course.
So you mentioned for you it doesn't make sense, or at least not much sense, to move to the US and work for Google. You are better off working from Italy or whatever. I actually believe, I'm curious to know your thoughts on people who actually decide to move to New York, San Francisco, the two major startup capital cities in the US, even though they don't manage to save money, but they are still exposed to that ecosystem, especially if, like me, they're non-technical founders. There has to be some advantage somehow. I'm curious to know.
Yeah, I think there's definitely advantage, right? Well, one, you're gonna get better pay. You're gonna work closer to the core of the company. So if you work for Google in Italy, you're kind of like on the C team. You know, if you work for Google here, you're on the A team. If you work in New York, you're like on the A.5 team. I would say maybe the question is like, how much do you care about staying where you are? So a lot of people maybe don't really care about where they grew up. They don't like it. Like, I grew up in Rome. Like, Rome is nice, right? But you might grow up in like a small town. Like, you want to leave it. I think that's great to like go somewhere else. I do think that it's almost like it's great to start somewhere, especially if you haven't, how would I say it? Like, when I moved here, I was already aware of a lot of the inner workings of the space, so I could make certain decisions. If you don't have that knowledge, then it's fine to just come here and like work somewhere and try to like understand more about how the business works, how the industry works, and all of that. But maybe the question is more like, what's like the next step from there, you know? So what do you want to, if what you want to do next is like build a company from scratch, it's like, you know, work at an early stage company and all of that, maybe you should just start from there. If your goal is to like become the CEO of Google, then just, you know, just go work at a big company right away. Again, I think it's all about the job that you want to do and like doing it at the best that you can do it. If you want to work in space, you know, yeah, go work at SpaceX, Lockheed Martin. Like, don't go work at a company at a startup right away. So it's very nuanced, but for me, the way to look at it, it's always like, you want to work on an early stage tech company, either as a founder, like as an employee, that's like your goal, but that's not everybody's goal, you know, so.
So it's kind of a segue from that, and an earlier thing you brought up, you're going into, say, Series A, B, and you're helping a startup grow in size. And so you're helping them with the hiring actions to bring additional technical staff on board. To get your foot in the door. You know, you're sitting here as a person like me, startup idea, hopefully going to have the nth version of a pitch deck done in November, finish data collection, and really hit the ground running to start knocking on doors come January. In the meantime, I'm starting to get pinged on LinkedIn because of my background. We have a startup opportunity, and we are looking to hire, basically coming in as their COO or their CEO, because the founder either doesn't have the technical skills to staff up and manage the personnel interactions. So if you come in that realm, you're coming in then kind of that in between, learning a little bit from the VC side and from the startup side.
There's a couple pieces to it. So we've had to replace CEOs in some of our companies. Not replace as like, you got to get fired, but it's like, hey, you are a Stanford professor that started a technical company, you got it to Series A. There's just really no match between what you know what to do best and like what a CEO needs to do. So I think that's a great place to learn for somebody who's not been a founder before, because you're basically coming, especially if you're not technical, you're coming into a company that has maybe gotten over the hump of like the technical risk, which is like, can you actually get something out there, but still has not figured out how to operate the business fully, So you're gonna, if the company is successful, you're not gonna be a founder, but like you're kind of a founder, because like the amount of work that takes from seed to Series A is huge, but the amount of work from Series A to like a success, it's even bigger, So it's not like the hard work is done, I've never cared. I never been very like ego driven, where it's like, oh, I need to be the founder. Like I need, like even at Decibel, I joined Decibel like a year and a half, 2 years after it was started, and the firm is only now 4.5, 5 years old. So I'm not a founder, but it's like the firm didn't really exist for all intents and purposes, especially in VC, where it's like, Sequoia is like 50 years old. It's not 40 years old.